Welcome back to the Mildew Twang Outdoors podcast, where we chronicle our time spent in the Delta, the swamps, the piney woods, and beyond. Here, we share our experiences and stories ranging from simple country living to lesser-known stories of American culture and what all of this means for us as Christians in today's world. In today's episode, we're going to pay tribute to deer season now that things are coming to an end here in South Alabama. You will be transported back in time to a Christmas story that altered the course of my life. You will join us in the deer stand as we relive a special memory or two. There will be love and laughter as we share these stories with you. Hop on and let's take a ride. Every kid in the world dreams about Christmas. What a magical time! The opportunity abounds to see family, eat sugary candies to your heart's delight, and, as most children so dearly love to do, open present after present, basking in the glory of shredded paper and torn-up boxes. What child would not be excited for the dreams of Santa Claus sliding down the chimney, stacking up a pile of gifts and flying away, leaving a plethora of fulfilled hopes and dreams? Christmas morning came and went, and my siblings and I had a pile of gifts from family and from Santa Claus laid up in the basement playroom. We were in a post-excitement stupor, laying around and playing the original Xbox NHL 2002 to be exact, when my mama called out for me, "Jay, come here. We have something to show you." Much to my disappointment, I left the ongoing Blues and Red Wings matchup and went to see what she needed. You may not have been enlightened, but that particular Xbox game was the greatest hockey game ever made. My brothers and I put hundreds of hours into our various rivalries. My mama said, "We have one last gift for you." Well, praise the Lord. I looked up to see a clear plastic bag in her hands with a pile of leaves inside of it. "Okay, Mama, but what is this?" She handed me the bag and told me to open it. So I grabbed the bag from her, and carefully rifling through it, I tore the plastic off. Clothes? Gah, who needs clothes? But wait, these clothes have leaves and sticks on them in funny patterns. The only time that I had seen fabric with that particular pattern was the year prior when I went down to Natchez, Mississippi to deer hunt for the first time. What was it called again? Mossy oak? Real tree? Clothes. Wait, camouflage! These were my very own coveralls, and they were insulated. I forgot all about my hockey rivalry with my brother, and I quickly yanked the tags off and threw on those coveralls over my Grinch-themed footy pajamas. I wasn't going to waste any time in testing those bad boys out. I found my boots and raced out the back door, running at breakneck speed to the broken trampoline we still had sitting behind the offset garage. I jumped on that trampoline, covered in 8 inches of snow, and laid on my back, glassing the oak canopies as squirrels and birds frolicked to and fro. I must have felt like Harry Potter after he donned his invisibility cloak for the first time, because all the while that I was sitting there, clearly hidden to the world around me, life just kept on ticking. It must have been an hour and a half before I was brought back to reality by my mama calling me back inside. Those coveralls were most definitely magical, as they not only kept me warm in the biting cold of St. Louis, but they made me disappear entirely to the world. There would not be a deer safe because I now had my eyes open like Saul did in the Bible after his conversion to Christianity in Acts, and I would not be the same again. I couldn't wait to get to the woods and put those things to good use. There is a first time for everything. First steps, first words, first job, first car, and the list goes on and on. Most everything that we identify with as an important first in our mainstream culture has an impact on our lives. What we do with these firsts and how we grow from them builds our character. My first pair of insulated coveralls was a stepping stone in my life. This gift meant that I was growing up. I was going to be trusted to go hunting with the great men in my life, and I was about to be a part of their inner circle. If only I knew then how much of an impact that one pair of coveralls would have on far more lives than my own. about to take a leap forward in time away from those raggedy old coveralls. I have another story for you, but I won't be telling this one alone. Before we kick this puppy into gear, I would like to introduce you to the rock of my life, the woman who has promised to love me and support me all of my days and who has done so now for nearly 5 years. I am proud to introduce you to my wife, Miss Brittany Caldwell.
Hey, handsome.
Hey, Brittany, good to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to be on the podcast.
I'm excited that you're here, and I can't wait to hear your story. We'll talk about your deer a little bit here shortly, and in future episodes, we're going to talk about our adventures in Mount LeConte and the Smokies. Are you excited for that?
Oh, boy. It'll be a flashback for sure.
It sure will. Right now, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I guess we've been married for almost 5 years, like you said. I moved around a lot. My dad was in the military, so I have family in Savannah, Georgia, so I consider that home, but I've only lived there for 4 years. I think the longest I was ever anywhere was 5 years.
Perfect. You grew up in Savannah. We talked a little bit about that. How did we meet? Do you remember how that played out? Because I think your story might be a bit different than mine on that.
Well, what I remember is I moved to Alabama and I started going to church where you were going to church with my family. And I started to get involved with the college group there. I remember going to your parents' house for Bible study. And I remember you led the study. And I remember you praying. The first thing I thought when I met you was, wow, that's what my husband's supposed to be like. Like, that's the person that would be my husband. But at that time, I had no idea that you would actually be my husband. I thought I was too young for you, but we're only a few years apart, so.
Yeah, it's just a few years. I was helping lead the college group at East Point at that time. I remember that you had on a cute red tank top and blue jeans. I think your blue jeans had holes in them, little holy church pants, if you guys like those fun Christian jokes. I do remember praying. I remember that whole situation, but what you didn't see was that I went home and later that night told my baby brother that I was going to marry you, although it took about 3 or 4 years to get you to go on a date with me.
Yeah, well, I had gone to Savannah for college. I was only here for the summer, so I was gone for 2 years and then came back. It wasn't until I came back that we got connected, I guess.
Yeah, I accidentally roped you into a blind date. We set up a college group adventure to go play trivia, and everybody canceled except for you and my sister. Shortly into that trivia, my sister realized that we had a connection, and she left us to finish out that night on our own.
She was sweet. Yeah, we were sitting in the car and Delane offered to leave. She was like, well, I'm going to head out. We were still talking. And I remember feeling really awkward. But after she left, I'm actually thankful she did because we sat and talked for like 3 hours that night.
That was a good night. There was one particular incident that set our future straight regarding our relationship, and that would be the time that I went alligator hunting with my dad on a tag that I had drawn. That one hunt changed the course of my life and your life forever. We also had a situation in the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, the lower delta, that is, involving a water spout and a pretty nasty thunderstorm. That one moment helped us to bond after we went through a tough time in our relationship. So,
Oh, man. Yeah, I guess so.
we'll talk about those one day in future episodes here, but for the time being, you take care of me and all of my hobbies, the outdoors, the hunting, the fishing, and all of the supporting stuff, but tell me about yours.
Oh, gosh. Well, you're definitely the hobby person in the relationship. I have trouble, I think, committing to any certain hobby. So I've got a craft room that, I mean, I crochet some because my grandmother and great grandmother did that. So I took that on. I think that's like my main hobby that I do. Every once in a while, I'll sew or paint or, I don't know, make things.
We get to be the old young couple at church with the crocheting, the sewing, all of my stuff, woodworking, leatherworking, and bluegrass music is pretty funny.
Old at heart, I guess.
I guess we both are, and we fit together perfectly. Brittany, I appreciate the introduction for the podcast listeners. We're going to jump into our primary story, a tale about you killing your first mature deer.
Sounds good.
Brittany, would you like to tell this story yourself, or how do you want to go about this?
I think you should tell the story and then we'll talk about it. You're the better storyteller than I am. So,
Perfect. Well, here we go, guys. Britt and I made plans on December 26, 2020 to head up to Stockton, Alabama and hunt. Now, Brittany is an avid hunter for about 2 good days a year, and I knew that this hunt was going to be her last one for the season. Is that right?
yeah, pretty much. I would hunt with my dad when I was younger a lot. That was like our quality time wherever we lived, but I'm not that big of a hunter, really.
The week prior, I had still hunted my way up and down that swamp property, and I knew where a primary travel route was for deer. The weather was bitterly cold, and not wanting to give her a bad taste of swampland hunting, I decked her out in enough of my insulated Carhartt gear that she had no option but to stay warm.
Yeah, I was really bundled up. You wouldn't let me get cold at all.
No, you look like the Michelin Man.
Pretty much.
It was actually kind of distressing that you couldn't walk very easily in all of those clothes. I remember I put you in waterproof boots, and I was planning to carry you across the flooded mud holes, the mud holes that we never drive through because we have gotten the truck stuck 3 different times. But in all of the clothes that we had on, I didn't know that you would be able to make it through that stuff. Now, lucky for me, the water was low, and I wouldn't need to carry you across that year.
Yeah. Well, anytime the ground is muddy or wet or anything, you'll put me up on your shoulders. You won't let me walk through it at all.
Hey, I'm a good husband.
You are. You're a great husband.
We parked just after 1:45 and headed out walking. The wind was blowing from the west-northwest, which meant that the trail we would be sitting over would be directly upwind of our stand location. I packed in a single climbing stand for you to sit in, Brittany, as well as my backpack and even more clothes should the temperature drop, although I don't know that we could have worn them anyway. By 2:30, we had the stand hung up in the tree, and knowing that Brittany had never used a climbing stand, I began to get nervous. My heart was racing as she eased up the tree, only making 3 moves up before I told her that enough was enough and she could sit tight, her feet about 8 feet above the ground. Do you remember that?
Yes, I wanted to climb higher. I had climbed up pretty high. I'd gotten in one of my dad's stands before, and it was pretty high off the ground. So I was like, I'm not even that far off the ground. But you were pretty insistent. You didn't want me any higher.
Yeah, well, I wanted that stand low enough so I could intervene from the ground in case you needed help. The palmettos and undergrowth being as thick as they were at eye level meant that 8 to 10 feet from the ground where you were, you could see over twice as far as I could, with me leaning up against that tree. Brittany, at this point in our story, is there anything we left out or anything else we need to touch on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we just walked out there, got settled, and sat and waited.
What did I say? We parked around 1:45. We got to stand up at 2:30. And time went slow, but it was a beautiful, quiet afternoon.
It was really nice. Yeah.
So time eased by slowly, and before I knew it, I had drifted off to sleep, just to be awakened by a soft to our west. That is a sound that I had heard once or twice before, and it snapped me to attention faster than Gomer Pyle in boot camp. You know what that sound was? A deer grunt.
Oh, that sound.
Yeah.
Yes.
Coupled with that grunt, there was the sound of leaves crunching in a peculiar cadence. Now, squirrels have a distinctive sound profile as they hop through the decaying leaves. It's kind of a jittery, fast-paced shuffle, and this was by no means a squirrel. I eased my eyes upwards without moving my head, and I saw horns not 40 yards from us sticking out of the palmettos. I knew it was a deer immediately, but you had a different opinion on the subject, a different description.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was sitting in the stand, so I heard rustling, and I was like, okay, there's something out there, and it sounded big. So I was like, okay, either it's a hog or it's a deer. So I'm looking and trying to see if I could see any sort of odd shape, any colors or anything that are different than the palmettos. All of a sudden, I saw like branches. I saw the horns, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, am I seeing things? I like blinked and tried to make sure that I was actually seeing a buck because I hadn't never shot a buck before. So, well, I had shot a button buck, but it wasn't an actual big buck.
You're not a mature buck deer.
Exactly. So I saw the horns and I was like, oh my gosh. So I tried to whisper and I said, Jay, Jay, but you didn't answer. So I was like, crap. Okay, I don't think he can hear me. So I got the gun up. I got sighted in. I was like, okay, all right. I gotta breathe. So I, took my deep breaths and held it and pulled the trigger and pow. And then he kind of ran off and that was it. And you were so excited.
You have no idea. I thought that was one of the coolest things I'd ever witnessed. But I believe you left something out of your story. You described everything perfectly with the shot, the sounds, everything that was going on, but you missed one key piece of information. You tried to get my attention, and you initially thought it was a donkey or a mule walking through the swamp. Do you remember that?
No.
Okay, you said, Jay, I saw a deer, but I saw him, but I think, man, he was dark brown. He was bigger than I thought a deer would be, and he kind of looked like a donkey for a second. And then I realized he had horns.
I think I kind of remember that. It was so fast. I mean, I heard the palmettos and I saw the horns and I knew I didn't have much time. So I think just like in a quick instance, it almost looked gray and not like brown, like the deer actually was. It was so gray. I was like, is that a stray donkey or something? I do remember that. I forgot.
I think that was the most memorable part of that hunt for me, realizing that you thought there was a donkey in the woods before you knew what was going on.
Well, and I hadn't hunted in like Palmetto. That was the first time I had ever gone out in that kind of area. Like I was used to hunting in Maryland, Washington State. That's kind of where my dad had taken me because that's where we lived. So it was kind of different looking.
As Brittany said, my 270 short mag barked as she squeezed off a shot. And that deer, which was initially quartering towards us, spun sharply and took off through the swamp, palmetto shaking as he ran. I quickly checked on Brittany before taking off to mark the location where it was standing with a bit of flagging tape. Do you remember that?
I do. You were out in the distance and I was sitting in the stand. You were like, stay there, stay there. So you went out because you wanted me to tell you where to go and where I saw the deer because I could see, obviously I shot it and I was up higher so I could tell you where to go. You were kind of down low, so I don't think you could see quite as much.
No, on the ground, my average sight distance right there is probably 25 yards, and that's still being obscured by palmettos. So, like I said, I barely saw him, but when you shot, I ran out, and I typically advise people to wait at a minimum 15 to 20 minutes or longer, as long as they can stand it before they go track a deer. But given the thick undergrowth and the messy soils that soak up blood as much as they do, I wanted to make sure we got him marked immediately and then got you out of the tree safely before we started to track him. I went back to the tree and helped you climb down, and off we went tracking that deer. And as I stated, if you've never tracked a deer through bottomland swamps, you guys need to know that the jet black dirt and the red and brown oak leaf litter basically absorb blood. It's like nature's sham wow. We had very little sign to go by, but the disturbed ground allowed us to follow him. We had leaves that were overturned and sticks, and a few broken palmetto fronds, if you remember that.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, you had gone and tracked it. So I just kind of tagged along after I shot him.
Well, after a short tracking job, he only ran about 40 yards. We came upon your first ever mature buck deer, that old gray-faced joker. I was more excited than Brittany was. In fact, I was the proudest husband alive in the world.
You were proud. I was excited. I was shaking.
Now your deer's on the ground. Do you remember what happened next? How did we get that joker out of the swamp after we killed him?
I remember you had to work really hard to drag that thing out. It was heavy. And I couldn't really help you. You ended up tying the legs or carrying it over your shoulders or something like that because it was so wet. And we had to drag it out. Oh, you had to drag it out a long ways.
Oh, goodness gracious, it sure was. I think we were about half a mile back or so, and it was a heck of a time, but I would do it all over again, and I can't wait to go hunt with you next year. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It means the world to me that you've taken the time to join me on this episode.
Of course. I was excited to do it. It was nice to tell the story and talk with you about it. I love you too.
All right, guys, let's take a quick step back. During our first story of the coveralls, I hinted that we would discuss Paul and his conversion to Christianity on the road to Damascus. That scripture passage comes straight from Acts chapter 9, and the story takes place as follows. Saul, a chief sinner by his own reckoning, in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, was on the road headed to Damascus. His intent was to travel to Damascus and bring back any man who belonged to the way, that is, Christianity. Saul was planning to punish those disciples due to their disobedience to the Jewish faith and the Jewish traditions. Along the way, Saul had an encounter with the Lord during which he was stricken blind, and through that blindness and his personal confrontation with the Lord, Saul ultimately went on to become Paul, a major disciple of the Lord who would use his talents and his salvation to reach unbelievers for Christ. If you have a copy of God's Word, you are still reaping the benefits of God's work by the hand of Paul, as he wrote a majority of the books in the New Testament. While I am not comparing my coveralls to Paul's conversion, I have learned that there are specific points in life that change us forever. There are key moments in our lives, great and small, that set our course. Sometimes the way is clear to us, and other times life is just as confusing as the poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, which I still have memorized from Miss Turner's literature class. Most of the time, the paths that set our course in life are only noticed in hindsight, and I believe it is better that way. Due to those old coveralls now stowed away in the attic, not only would I go on to become a successful hunter, but I would have a far-reaching sphere of influence beyond my wildest dreams. Those coveralls led to my wife killing her first mature buck. They led me to friendships that will last a lifetime. They have allowed me to lead others to Christ, and they have pushed me to continue to grow in my faith by seeing the marvelous creation that the Lord God has made firsthand in nature. It's incredible how such a small gift can lead to such great eternal impacts. This week, I challenge you to do some thinking and see if you have a pair of coveralls in your life. You never know what you might find. I sure hope that you've enjoyed this week's episode. Tune in next week to hear about our 2023-2024 deer season and what we learned. This will be a show that you will not want to miss. If you have any questions or comments, reach out to me via Spotify Podcast or Apple Podcast. Please provide feedback so that we can continue to develop our show for you. And remember to share us with your friends and follow and rate us as we grow. Love in Christ.